Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about percents. So a percent is a value out of 100. So for example, if you have the value 40%, that actually means 40 out of 100. Now typically when you use a percent, you typically don't have 100 things you're talking about. So for example, let's say you're doing a survey of the school. And we have, about like 535 students at Penn Orange Area High School. So if we say like 25% of the students like or prefer a certain type of sandwich for lunch. Well, again, we don't have 100 students, we have 535. But percents are a comparison out of 100. So it's as if you're referring to 100 things, okay? So again, a percent is always out of 100. So anytime you're given a percent, you could actually make it into a fraction by putting it over 100. So if I'm given 9%, we could have 9 over 100. And a percent kind of refers to almost like a probability in, talking about certain things, the likelihood of something occurring, or, it could just be, to give you a comparison value, of a preference of a certain thing. So percents have a lot of uses in everyday life. A lot of times if you watch the weather, they'll say it's a 30% chance of rain. So, depending upon how you are as a person, 30%, that's close to about 33%. So there's maybe a 3% chance it's going to rain. So maybe you say, I'm not going to worry about grabbing a raincoat. Or if you hate rain, you might say, well, there's a 1/3 chance of grabbing or it's going to be raining, so I'm going to grab my raincoat. So now if they say there's an 80% chance of rain, you probably going to be a good idea to grab your raincoat. So percents have a lot of uses for probability, to give you an idea of, preferences, to give you for data, a lot of uses of percents in everyday life. But again, a percent is out of 100. So when we're talking about percents, we can actually take a decimal form of a number or a fraction form of a number and make it into a percent, or convert between those other two forms. So we could take a percent and make it into a fraction or a decimal. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to convert between the three forms of a number involving percents. Okay, so typically the easiest conversions are actually from a decimal to a percent, or a percent to a decimal. And let me show you that. So in order to convert from a decimal to a percent, it's very, very, very easy. All you have to do is multiply by 100, okay? And if you're converting from a percent to a decimal, so let's say you're going this way, all you have to do is divide by 100, okay? So I would definitely write those down. The arrow tells you which way you're going. So again, for a percent to a decimal, we divide by 100. If we're going from a decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. So let me show you. So let's say we're given the decimal 0.25, okay? Well, we could easily make that a percent. All we have to do using our calculator is multiply that by 100. So again, to make a decimal in the percent, you times by 100. So if you take 0.25 and times by 100 in your calculator, you're going to get 25. So that would be 25%. Okay. Now let's do the reverse. Let's say we have 8%. Well, to go from a percent to a decimal, you divide by 100, because percents are always out of 100, so the operations involve the number 100. So it's always going to be involving number 100. So if we take 8% and divide it by 100 using your calculator, you get 0.08. Okay? Let's do two more, and again, we'll keep switching the way we'll do it. So let's say we're given the decimal 1.20, okay? And we want to make that a percent. Well, remember, to make a decimal into a percent, we multiply by 100. So if you take 1.2 or 1.20 and multiply it by 100, you get 120%. Now, wait a second. 120%? Yeah, you guys, you could have percents over 100. And hopefully you see that. A percent is out of one whole unit. So just to show you what I mean, let me go just in this discussion. I don't want to get sidetracked, but to show you, a percent is out of one whole unit. So if I have 100%, that means 100 out of 100 people. Or if we're talking about people, let's say we take a vote. Let's say how many people would prefer to have how many students would prefer to have half day of school versus a full day of school? And let's say 100 out of 100 students say they would like a half day of school out of a full day of school. Well, that reduces to 1, right? So if you have 100%, that's one whole unit of something. So if you have a percent, going back a slide, if you have a percent greater than 100, that's going to be greater than 1 as a decimal. Okay, so it is possible to have percents over 100, especially when you're talking about percent change or percent growth of something. Okay, or extra credit on a test, right? The last one, let's say we have a percent of 90%. We want to make that into a decimal. Remember, to make a percent into a decimal, all we do is divide by 100, and you get 0.9. Okay? Now, there is another way to do it. I like the involving 100 because percents are always out of 100, but I don't know if you guys saw that. And let me just clear this off so you can see a little bit better. But there is another way to do it, and I'll show you those ways right now. Please do what way works for you. But one way to make a decimal percent besides multiplying by 100 is just move your decimal point 2 places to the right. So if you see a decimal is always, wherever you see it. So if you're given a decimal, you can move your decimal 2 places to the right, and you see you get 25%. That's the same as multiplying by 100. Now, if we're doing the reverse, let's say we have 8%, right? Well, if we don't see a decimal, it would be at the end of the number, right? So to make a percent into a decimal, you actually move your decimal. Another way to do it, instead of dividing by 100, is to move it 2 places to the left. So you'd actually have 0.08, okay? Or if we're talking about going back from a decimal to a percent, let's say we're doing this one. Remember, to go from a decimal to a percent, you can multiply by 100 or move your decimal point 2 places to the right, 120%. Or if we're given 90%, to make a percent into a decimal, you can divide it by 100 or move your decimal 2 places to the left, 0.9. Okay? Let's talk about other conversions. So if you're given a percent and you want to go from a percent to a fraction, so what you do is you put your number over 100 and then make sure you reduce. Okay? So again, to go from a percent to a fraction, put your number over 100 and then reduce. So let's say we're given 4%, right? If we want to make that into a fraction, we would do 4 over 100 and now reduce. So you could use your calculator for that. On our calculators, that would be the ABC button. So you could do 4 ABC 100. But 4 is actually the biggest number that goes into both of these. So this would reduce to 1 over 25. Okay? So 4% is 1 over 25 as a fraction. Let's look at another one. Let's say we have 58%. Okay? We want to make that into a fraction. So we do 58 over 100. And then reduce that using your calculator. Or by hand, 2 is the biggest number that goes into both of these. Are both even. So we get 29 over 50. Okay? Or let's say we have 7%. We would do 7 over 100 and then reduce, but that one actually doesn't reduce. Okay? So that would be our final answer. All right? Now let's say you're given the fraction of something and you want to make it into a percent. Well, what you have to do is divide your numerator by your denominator, okay, using your calculator, and then take your answer, and that will be a decimal. So when you divide your numerator by your denominator, you're getting a decimal, right? And if you remember, to make a decimal into a percent, you actually times by 100. So that's the process for making a fraction into a percent. So you're going to divide your numerator by your denominator using your calculator, get a decimal, and then take that decimal, and then you're making your decimal to a percent by multiplying by 100. So let's do some examples of that. So let's say we're given 3/5. So let's say we survey 5 teachers, and 3 to 5 teachers say they prefer Dunkin' Donuts over Starbucks. So what we'll do using our calculator is we'll divide 3 by 5. Make sure you do your numerator first. So numerator divided by denominator, hit equals. Your calculator should say 0.6. Okay, now that's a decimal, right? Now all you got to do is to make your decimal into a percent, multiply it by 100. Okay, so when you do that, you get 60%. All right, so that's how you make a fraction into a percent. Divide your numerator by your denominator, and then you have a decimal. Multiply it then by 100%, by 100. Excuse me. So let's say we'll do about 11 over 18, right? So divide 11 by 18 in your calculator, and when you do that, you should get something like 0.61 repeating. So we'll round our final answer. Remember, we still got one more step. So just leave that in your calculator window. Okay, and again, there's a bunch of ones after that one. Hit times 100. Okay, and when you do that, you should get 61.111 repeating. So now we'll round that. In our class, remember, we always round to the hundredths place. So we look at the thousandths place, and now we'll keep that the same. So we get 61.11% if we round to the nearest hundredths place. So if your decimal doesn't terminate, multiply it by 100 first, so leave it in your calculator window, and then multiply it by 100, and then you can round that final answer to nearest hundredth. Okay? And one more, just to make sure. Let's say we have 2 1/5. Well, that's not a fraction, right? That's a mixed number. Let's make it a fraction first, right? Multiply and add 11 over 5. Keep that denominator the same. So now we could divide 11 by 5 using your calculator. And when you do that, you're going to get 2.2, right? So 11 divided by 5 equals 2.2. Now, it's a decimal, right? Hit times 100, and you get 220%. Front zero there. Remember, you could have percents over 100, and that is about 2.2. It's a lot bigger than 1, so it's going to be a percent a lot greater than 100. Now, you could also, guys, just so you're aware, take any fraction and make it a decimal or vice versa. That involves place value. I'm not going to get into that discussion, although you can certainly do it. You guys remember place values, and that's something you kind of did in the middle school, although, sometimes it's a good review for students, but I'm not going to get into that lesson right now. Basically, if you're converting between decimals, percents, and fractions, go to a form and then you should be able to get the other form. So we'll actually tie it together right now. Okay, sorry for the silence there. So, guys, you won't always be given this situation. It might just be a question. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you a form of the number. And what you're going to do is you're going to take and convert it to the other two forms. Now, your worksheet might look a little different, be set up differently. Don't say you don't know how to do it. Use your noggin. Use your notes that you just did. Because usually converting between these two are the easiest, if you remember. Percent to decimal and decimal to percent, but it's also easy to go from, a percent to a fraction. So let's get started. Okay, so I gave you 3 different numbers, and we're going to convert it to the other 2 that are missing. So let's start with the first one. And if you need to get a chance to copy all this down, just pause the video for a second and restart it once you're ready. So we have 11%. Actually, both forms are pretty easy to get to. Remember, to get from a percent to a decimal, if I'm going from a percent to a decimal, all I have to do is divide it by 100. Remember, percents always involve number 100. So if you divide 11% by 100 or move the decimal point 2 places to the left, you get 0.11. And then to make a percent into a fraction, you put it over 100 and simplify. Now, that actually can't be simplified, so that's your final answer for the fraction, 11 over 100. Let's look at our second one. They give us the decimal of 0.24. Well, remember, it's very easy to go from a decimal to a percent. All we actually do is multiply by 100. So if we multiply by 100 or move our decimal 2 places to the right, we get 24%. And now it's pretty easy, given the percent now, to make this a fraction. 24 over 100. Remember, it always involves an operation with the number 100. But now we got to simplify, okay? So the biggest number that goes in the numerator and denominator is 4. So 24 divided by 4 is 6. 100 divided by 6 is 25. And that's our final answer. And then finally, we're given the fraction, 6 over 13. Now, remember, to get to a percent, you have to divide your numerator by your denominator, right? Divide your numerator by your denominator. But then times by 100. So when you divide your numerator by denominator, you're making something into a decimal. So using your calculator, divide 6 by 13. And when you do that, you should get... And I'm not going to write all the numbers, but 0.461538, right? So now take that answer, it's a decimal right now, times it by 100 to make it a percent. but then we always round our answer to the nearest hundredth, right? So I will leave this in your calculator window when you divided the 6 by 13, multiply that by 100, and then round that final answer. And when you do that, you get 46, and if I round it to the nearest hundredth, 0.15%, okay? And now I actually go back and finish this one. We'll round this to nearest hundredth. That'll be 0.46. So that's how you do it, guys. It's that simple. Percents are always out of 100, okay? And if you're converting between the forms, percent to a decimal, all you got to do is divide by 100. Decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. To go from a percent to a fraction, put it over 100 and then simplify. And you can convert easily between all three of these forms. So thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully you found this video lesson helpful. There's a lot of resources online on this, guys. So if you had any questions, check those out or send me an email. I'll be glad to help you out or come to a Google Meet. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day, everybody.